There is no question that having Amal in my life changed everything for me.
We're very happy.
She's an amazing human being.
I got a brilliant, beautiful wife.
For an entire generation, George Clooney was more than a star. He was an institution, a man who seemed to have mastered the art of living, possessing fame, beauty, and an unshakable sense of purpose. And then, he found the woman who made him believe in forever. But beneath the gilded surface of flashbulbs and flawless smiles, a shadow was beginning to stretch. The man whose very currency was charm and effortless humor began to show hairline fractures, invisible to the world, but deeply felt by those who stood closest to the flame. And when the silence was finally broken, the story that emerged was not one of Hollywood glamour, but of quiet, human heartbreak. His transformation from Hollywood's most resolute bachelor into its most devoted husband was a narrative the world had watched with fascination. He was the man who had sworn off matrimony, a vow forged in the embers of a brief, searing union with actress Thalia Balsam in the early 1990s. He would deflect the subject in interviews with a wry smile, calling himself ill-suited for marriage, even as the world he knew settled into domesticity around him. In its place, Clooney built a life defined by the hum of film sets, the gravity of political causes, and the echo of late-night laughter. To the world, he was the embodiment of elegant independence, yet in the private hours, a quiet loneliness lingered, the kind that fame can amplify but never cure. Then, in the sun-drenched summer of 2013, fate intervened. During a tranquil interlude at his villa on Lake Como, a mutual friend orchestrated an introduction that would alter the course of his life. She was not from his world. Her name was Amal Alamuddin, a brilliant and formidable human rights lawyer, her intellect honed at Oxford and New York University. She was not dazzled by the machinery of Hollywood, nor did she chase its relentless spotlight. When she walked into his home, she carried her own gravity. As George would later recall, it was as if the very axis of his world had shifted. Everything was different, he said, on every level. Their romance blazed with an astonishing speed, and by April of 2014, Clooney found himself on one knee in the quiet of his own kitchen, anxiously awaiting her discovery of a drawer. Inside, a ring lay hidden. The moment nearly passed her by, stretching into a delicate dance of awkward laughter and charged silence. His final plea was laced with humor and vulnerability. "I'm 50, 2 years old," he said, "and my knee's gonna give out soon." Amal said yes. That September, against the timeless, watery backdrop of Venice, Italy, they were married, surrounded by intimate friends, a sea of cameras, and a world hungry for a fairy tale ending. And for a time, it was precisely that. The man once defined by late-night revelry was transformed. He became a family man, and with the arrival of their twins, Ella and Alexander, in 2017, he discovered what he would call the single greatest moment of his life. They built a home in Provence, launched the Clooney Foundation for Justice, and became a global symbol of intellect and glamour fused as one. She argued cases of profound global importance before the United Nations and the International Criminal Court. He, in turn, directed and starred in films that wrestled with the conscience of society. They appeared unbreakable, a portrait of modern grace and unwavering partnership, but by 2025, after more than a decade of marriage, the immense pressures of long-distance work and quiet emotional strain began to etch cracks into their perfect picture. It was a lifetime by Hollywood's fleeting standards. To the public eye, they were still the ideal, smiling on red carpets and raising their twins. They still appeared hand in hand at global events, but away from the blinding flashbulbs, their lives were charting divergent courses. Amal had accepted a prestigious teaching role at the venerable University of Oxford, while George prepared for a long-awaited new chapter in his career. He was set for his Broadway debut in Good Night and Good Luck. For the first time, the distance between them wasn't merely emotional. They were now living on different continents. Insiders, speaking to Radar Online, hinted that this was not the usual separation of two busy professionals. It was something deeper, a quiet trial separation, a truth so difficult, neither was prepared to admit it out loud. Amal and the children settled into life in England, surrounded by her academic world, while George found himself on a very different kind of stage, an entire ocean away. He spent long, solitary nights lost in rehearsal in the heart of New York City, sometimes alone in his apartment after the final curtain fell, with the quiet company of a drink he had sworn off years ago. A source close to the couple confided that the distance had taken its toll, describing it not as a battle, but a slow, silent drift, a fading of the very light that once defined them. It was a stark contrast to what Clooney himself had once professed, back in an interview with CBS Mornings in April of 2025. He had smiled that famous smile, insisting, "We still haven't found anything to fight about." It sounded like a line from a perfect script, a flawless marriage, free of all tension. Yet relationship experts would later caution that such perfect harmony can often mask a far more dangerous truth: silence. When couples sidestep conflict, they begin to bury the hurt, the disappointment, the bone-deep exhaustion. They smile through the storm, until one day there is nothing left to say. Amal's world in Oxford was a universe of purpose lectures, students, and the weighty casework that took her to The Hague. George watched her with an admiration that was, at times, laced with a sharp pang of guilt, admitting to the New York Times that when they first met, he never imagined he stood a chance. She was 17 years his junior, a brilliant mind who already possessed a life complete without him. That difference, once a charming footnote to their story, had begun to feel like a chasm. He was 64, she was 47. Their lives were now moving at two entirely different speeds. Then came the relapse, a single night that would change the very foundation of their world. The breaking point, it didn't arrive with the thunder of shouting or the sting of betrayal. It came quietly, in the form of one evening that began with applause and ended in profound regret. In June of 2025, George Clooney stood beside Amal at the Tony Awards in New York, a vision of Hollywood royalty. To the millions watching, the couple appeared flawless, a study in elegance and synchronicity, radiant beneath the unforgiving stage lights. But as the hours wore on, the thin line between celebration and escape began to dissolve. After years of unwavering self-discipline, George decided to make up for lost time, for all his abstinence, in one single night. He would later confess to Esquire magazine that he concluded the evening in a state reminiscent of a high school boy who'd had far too much. The following day brought sickness and shame, but he tried to dismiss it with a laugh. The public may have found the anecdote charming, but Amal did not. According to friends who spoke with Radar Online, she was quietly furious. For her, this wasn't about a single night of overindulgence. It was about the ghost it had resurrected. She admired the tremendous effort he put into staying sober, one insider revealed, but hearing him boast about getting dumb drunk, it truly wounded her. To Amal, it was a painful echo of the man George used to be. The younger, more reckless actor who once arrived on film sets nursing a hangover and treated his own excesses as a running joke. She had fallen in love with the man who had outgrown that life, the man who had evolved into a husband, a father, and a partner she could depend on. When George attempted to downplay the incident, Amal drew a line in the sand. She's told George that his drinking isn't something she's prepared to overlook, the source added. For a man who prided himself on absolute control, those words cut deep. To be confronted by his wife, the very woman who once called him her anchor, was to be forced to face a terrifying possibility. He was slipping. Friends described the weeks that followed as tense, heavy with an unspoken weight. They retreated to their $8.3 million estate in Provence, surrounded by ancient olive trees, a sprawling vineyard, and a profound silence. This place was meant to be their sanctuary, yet its stillness only seemed to amplify the vast emotional distance between them. Amal would spend her mornings immersed in legal cases, working remotely from a world away, while George would wander the gardens, rehearsing lines for a stage he had yet to conquer. Over candlelit dinners, the conversation had become polite, a delicate veneer over a growing chasm. His wild nights, once the stuff of legend, now struck a dissonant chord. She doesn't find it charming, a family friend would later confide. Her world was one of meticulous order to young children, a formidable career in international law, a universe built on precision that his freewheeling spirit sometimes threatened to disrupt. And the one thing she could not abide was the specter of chaos threatening the sanctuary they had built for their family. This was the fracture point, the beginning of the quiet separation, and the slow crumbling of a perfect facade. By March of 2025, the whispers had escaped the gilded cages of their inner circle. According to Radar Online, the rumors began to move like a wildfire, impossible for either of them to contain. Sources from within their orbit spoke in hushed tones of an arrangement, a carefully constructed distance they termed a trial separation. Amal, with their twins in tow, had retreated to the hallowed, rain-swept quads of England, immersing herself in her work at Oxford. George, meanwhile, remained behind in the electric hum of New York City, chasing a ghost of a dream that had haunted him for decades, a debut on the Broadway stage. To the outside world, the narrative was flawless. George would speak with effusive pride of Amal's vital work. Amal, in turn, would express her unwavering support to her colleagues. But behind closed doors, the distance was beginning to fray the edges of their connection. They fought against it with daily video calls, a digital thread stretched across an ocean. They tried to weave their lives together with pixels and sound, the vibrant crayon strokes of Ella's latest drawing, the echo of Alexander's laughter, bedtime stories whispered into the void between time zones. But as weeks bled into months, the geographic distance metastasized into something deeper, something emotional. They were accustomed to brief separations, one insider noted, but this was different, a test they never anticipated. Amal's life in Oxford was a relentless symphony of obligation, lecturing on law, navigating high-stakes international cases, her days consumed by the weight of global responsibility. George's world on Broadway was a universe apart, the grueling hours of rehearsal, the adrenaline of a late-night curtain call, and then the profound, lonely silence that always follows the applause. They were two titans living in parallel orbits, each driven by a profound sense of purpose. Neither was wrong, but their paths had diverged. And even the most formidable love can begin to fray when stretched between the magnetic poles of two colossal ambitions. The tabloid press, sensing blood in the water, was merciless. Headlines screamed from the newsstands, words like strain, distance, and the ever-present whisper of divorce. But the detail that lent these stories their chilling credibility wasn't a confirmation, but a profound and deafening silence from the Clooney camp. It was a silence that spoke volumes. Friends suggested that for Amal, this time apart was a period of necessary, sober reflection. But for George, it was said to feel less like reflection and more like an exile. He was haunted by the absence of his family's chaotic, beautiful noise. He missed the sound of Amal in the kitchen, one confidant revealed, missed the thunder of his children's feet on the floorboards. For him, the city that never sleeps wasn't a beacon of freedom. It was loneliness wearing the mask of opportunity. And then, just as the narrative of their collapse seemed all but written, they materialized on the shimmering waterways of the Venice International Film Festival in August of 2025, arm in arm. They were smiling, a portrait of effortless grace, as if the whispers and the distance had been a collective fever dream. The cameras flashed, the crowds roared, and for a fleeting moment, the grand illusion was restored. Amal was radiant, a vision in couture. George, the very definition of composed. It was the photograph the world was desperate to see. The Clooneys, once again, untouchable. But beneath the polished veneer, a question hung in the humid Venetian air. Was this a reunion, or was it simply a masterclass in performance from two people who knew the camera's gaze all too well? Or was this something more fragile, more real? An attempt to navigate their way back to one another across a divide of their own making. As one friend quietly observed, they are masters of sealing off their private world. But sometimes, what the world sees as peace is just a quiet, shared sadness. Then came the interview, a confession, hidden in plain sight. When Glamour magazine published its feature on Amal Clooney in the autumn of 2025, the piece was ostensibly a celebration of her friendship with makeup artist Charlotte Tilbury. But it was a single, unguarded quote that would send shockwaves through the story. They were the carefully chosen, seldom spoken words she offered about her husband, the first time in months Amal Clooney had broken her public silence on George. And in that moment, she revealed something far more profound than any official statement ever could. I have a partner in life who is so supportive of what I do," she confided to the interviewer, her gaze momentarily finding George as he drifted in and out of the room, a fleeting presence. She recalled a specific moment, a memory painted with vivid detail. "When I became a mom, he was the first to say, 'You've got this speech at the Security Council. I'll take care of the kids. Go do it.'" For a fleeting moment, those words seemed to silence the whispers that had shadowed them. But even as the rumors quieted, an undercurrent of exhaustion was impossible to ignore. Amal's gratitude was tinged with a profound weariness. It was the sound of someone recalling a sunlit memory from a shadowed room. And for George, hearing those words was a bittersweet symphony. He had always revered her brilliance, her unwavering compassion, her almost mythic fearlessness in the courtroom. And yet, those very qualities had become a mirror, reflecting what he felt was slipping away, the simple feeling of being her equal. In the quiet confidence of close friends, he confessed that the gilded cage of fame, the very glamour the world envied, had become an unbearable weight. "I never wanted to be a headline about love," he admitted. "I just wanted to be a husband," he lamented to a trusted associate. So, when George Clooney finally broke his own silence later that year, it wasn't through a press release or a carefully crafted denial. It was with a quiet, almost startling candor. In an interview no one saw coming, the question was finally asked directly, "Were the rumors of a split true?" He paused, the silence stretching for several long seconds before he finally spoke. "You know," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "marriage isn't about staying the same, it's about holding on. When everything around you changes, and when you change, too." It wasn't a confirmation of divorce, but it was far from a denial. Instead, he painted a haunting portrait of what it feels like to lose a connection. "Sometimes," he admitted, "you can sit across the table from the person you love and feel like you're 1,000 miles away. And when that happens, it's not anger you feel, it's grief." Those who knew him best understood. This was George's true confession. It was an acknowledgement that something sacred, something intangible between them, had begun to fade. There was no great scandal, no singular betrayal. There was only the slow, quiet erosion caused by time, ambition, and distance. The couple once thought untouchable had, in the end, become just like everyone else. Two people searching for a fragile balance between love and identity, between a life of duty and the needs of the self. And yet, Amal's final words in that interview still echoed, offering a fragile glimmer of hope. "I feel so incredibly lucky to share every day with him," she had said. "And now we're 4. I don't take any of it for granted." Was it, perhaps, her way of saying the story wasn't over? That a marriage, even when bruised and tested, could still survive the weight of honesty? The aftermath. By the close of 2025, George Clooney had learned a difficult truth, that even the most beautiful stories can break in silence. What had begun as one of Hollywood's most celebrated unions had quietly transformed into a cautionary tale about distance, about aging and the ultimate limits of control. The world still saw the flawless smiles, the practiced grace, but those inside their circle noticed the shift in the atmosphere. The long, playful interviews were gone. The easy jokes on the red carpet had vanished. In their place were shorter answers and much, much longer silences. Friends whispered that the couple had reached an understanding, to spend more time apart. It wasn't a decision born of anger, but of a quiet, somber acceptance. Amal remained at Oxford, teaching law, raising Ella and Alexander in a world away from the flashbulbs. While Amal found her peace in the tranquil English countryside, George remained a world away, a solitary figure in Provence, his days measured by the sun moving across his vineyard. His time was a tapestry of occasional directing projects and the distant echo of Broadway commitments, all woven around the one undeniable truth: their shared, profound love for their children. They adore their children, a voice from their inner circle revealed. But they've come to the quiet, heartbreaking realization that they can no longer walk the same path in life. She is a woman who thrives on structure and purpose. He is a man who thrives on freedom and nostalgia. In the end, they were simply forged from different stars. In private, George confessed to being haunted by the passage of time. At 64, he was no longer the young man who could charm his way out of every shadow. The mirror had become a cruel historian, cataloging the lines around his eyes, the deep exhaustion that lingered long after the applause had faded. There was the persistent ache in his knees. Meanwhile, Amal remained a figure of unwavering focus and radiance, a woman defined by sheer intellect and unstoppable momentum. "I used to be the one moving too fast," George once joked, the humor barely masking a deeper truth. "Now, she's the one running ahead, and I'm just trying to keep up." Their sprawling home in Provence, once a place of vibrant laughter, had become a quiet refuge for reflection, where George would spend the long, drawn-out evenings. He would walk through the ancient olive groves, often with a glass of wine he swore to himself would be the last. It wasn't the spirit of rebellion anymore, it was the quiet weight of resignation. He wasn't drinking to celebrate, only to remember what it once felt like, when life was a simpler story. His mind would often drift back to the night of his proposal, the nervousness in his hands, the singular, desperate hope that she would say yes. "I think," he once confided to a close friend, "I just wanted to prove I could be someone's forever." But forever, he'd admit, is so much harder than I thought. And yet, even in the twilight of their union, there were moments of grace when the twins visited during school holidays. They would fill the silent house with a forgotten laughter. Amal still called, her concern genuine, even if her tone was now draped in a careful formality. They would speak of the children, of her foundation, of his shows. They spoke of everything except the vast, silent space that had grown between them. Some say they are still together, quietly rebuilding from the ashes. Others whisper the separation is already a silent, settled fact, a truth merely waiting for the right moment to step into the light. But perhaps the story of George and Amal isn't about an ending at all. Perhaps it's about the true cost of holding on to love when fame, distance, and time itself conspire to pull it apart. Do you believe a love like that can truly survive? After everything they have weathered, share your thoughts in the quiet space of the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more of Hollywood's untold stories.